People in this country love to tell you that family comes first. They put it on coffee mugs and cross-stitch it onto throw pillows and repeat it at Thanksgiving, like it's a commandment carved in stone. We absorb it from the time we're old enough to understand words. This idea that the people bound to you by blood or by a marriage license are somehow owed a loyalty that supersedes your own safety, your own sanity, your own right to exist without fear. Nobody tells you what to do when the family is the threat. Nobody stitches that onto a pillow. I know now what I didn't know at 29 years old when I married my husband. I know that love can be genuine and still be weaponized. I know that a person can smile at your wedding and spend the next 3 years calculating how to dismantle everything you've built. And I know, with absolute certainty, that the most dangerous room I have ever stood in was not a dark alley or a stranger's car or any of the places we're warned about growing up. It was my mother-in-law's kitchen on a Saturday afternoon in October, and the danger was wearing a cream-colored cardigan and offering me a cup of tea. My name is Elena. I am 34 years old. I run a financial consulting firm with 11 employees, a corner office, and a client list that would have made 22-year-old me dizzy with disbelief. I have 2 dogs, a house I bought entirely on my own, and a daughter who is 3 years old and has never once had to share a room with someone who wished she didn't exist. My life is quieter now than it has ever been, and I have learned to receive that quiet, like a gift. But I want to go back to the beginning, because the beginning matters. I met my husband, Daniel, when I was 26. He was warm and funny and attentive in ways that felt rare. He remembered things I told him in passing. He showed up when he said he would. He had a steadiness about him that I was drawn to, coming from a childhood that had been anything but steady. My own father passed away when I was 23, leaving behind a small life insurance policy and a savings account he'd spent 40 years quietly filling. He was a careful man, my father. He trusted almost no one with his money, and he left instructions that the inheritance was to be released to me when I turned 30, not a day sooner. He said he wanted me to be old enough to know what I actually needed. I told Daniel about the inheritance early in our relationship. I told him because I believed in transparency, and because I had been raised to distrust financial secrecy. I did not understand then that some information shared in intimacy can later be used as a map by people who want to take things from you. His mother, Diane, found out about my inheritance through Daniel. I know this because Daniel told me he had mentioned it, casually, during a phone call with her. He didn't think it was a significant disclosure. He had been raised in a household where everything was shared with Diane, every decision filtered through her approval, every financial choice made with her commentary. He didn't see her as controlling. He saw her as involved. There is a difference, he used to tell me, between a mother who is nosy and a mother who cares. I spent 3 years learning exactly how wrong that distinction was. Diane was a precise woman. She was not openly cruel, not at first. She was the kind of cruel that arrives disguised as helpfulness, as concern, as the natural authority of a woman who has been the center of her family's universe for 30 years and sees no reason to relinquish that position. She made comments about my cooking that sounded like suggestions. She rearranged items in my kitchen when she visited and called it organizing. She told Daniel, in front of me, that she hoped I was taking care of myself properly because stress could affect fertility. I was 29 and had been married for 4 months. I installed a security camera in the entryway of our home after the 3rd incident of items going missing during her visits. Small things at first. A silver bracelet my father had given me, a folder of documents I kept in the entryway desk. I mentioned the missing bracelet to Daniel, and he looked at me with the expression I would come to recognize over the years. That careful, pained blankness that meant he was choosing not to engage. He said he was sure I had misplaced it. I said I was sure I had not. We moved on, which is to say he moved on and I carried it. The camera was small. I placed it inside a decorative clock on the entryway shelf. I told Daniel I had installed a security system because of a break-in 2 streets over. He said that was sensible and asked if I needed help with the app. I said I had it handled. I did not tell him about the camera because I already knew, somewhere I didn't want to fully examine, that what I was beginning to suspect would require evidence before anyone would believe me. The camera footage I collected over the following 8 months was not dramatic. It was methodical. It showed Diane during visits when I was at work and Daniel had let her in, walking slowly through the entryway, pausing at the desk, removing papers and replacing them carefully. It showed her standing in the kitchen doorway, speaking on her phone in a low voice. It showed her, twice, going through my coat pockets while they hung on the hook beside the front door. I saved everything. I dated it. I backed it up to an external drive I kept at my office. The month before I turned 30, when the inheritance was scheduled to transfer into my account, Diane's behavior shifted in ways that were difficult to ignore even for Daniel. She began calling daily. She began arriving unannounced on weekends. She began dropping references to money into conversations with a frequency that felt less like coincidence and more like rehearsal. She mentioned, twice in 1 week, that Daniel's cousin had just bought a second property with help from his parents. She mentioned that a good investment opportunity had come up that she hated to see pass by simply for lack of capital. I did not engage with any of it. I had already spoken to a financial advisor and moved the soon-to-be transferred funds into an account that was solely in my name at a bank Diane did not know we used. I had also spoken to a family law attorney, not because I thought I needed one yet, but because I had learned by then that preparation is not paranoia. It is just competence. Daniel did not know I had done any of this. I want to be careful here about how I describe my husband, because he was not a villain. He was something more complicated and, in some ways, more painful than a villain. He was a man who had been so thoroughly shaped by his mother's version of reality that he could not see the walls of it. He loved me. I believe that even now. But he loved me the way someone loves a person while refusing to fully see them, and that is its own kind of diminishment. When the inheritance transferred on a Thursday morning in February, I said nothing to Daniel. I had not decided yet whether to tell him, which is a sentence that would have horrified me 4 years earlier when I believed that marriage meant total transparency. Experience had taught me that transparency requires a foundation of safety, and I was no longer certain I had that. Diane found out anyway. I don't know exactly how. My best guess is that Daniel mentioned the transfer date during one of their calls without realizing he was handing her a clock to count down from. She called me the following Saturday morning while Daniel was at the gym. Her voice was warm, the way it always was when she wanted something. She said she'd been thinking about the family, about Daniel's future, about the fact that they'd always dreamed of opening a small business together, something Daniel could run, something that would give him stability. She said she knew I had just received my inheritance, and she wanted to have a family conversation about how best to use it. I sat very still on the couch, with my phone pressed to my ear, and I felt something settle inside me, with a heaviness that I recognized as the final departure of any remaining doubt. I told her I appreciated her calling, and that I would speak to Daniel, and we would all connect soon. I hung up. I sat there for another 10 minutes. Then I called my attorney. That afternoon, Daniel came home, and I told him what his mother had said. I watched him process it. I watched him build, in real time, the architecture of justification. He said she probably hadn't meant it the way it sounded. He said she was just excited, just trying to contribute, just trying to be part of our life. He said I was always so quick to assume the worst about her. I asked him very quietly if he thought it was appropriate for his mother to call me, while he was out of the house, to discuss redirecting my personal inheritance toward a business venture she had conceived without us. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he thought we should all have dinner and talk it through properly. I said that sounded like a good idea. I did not tell him that I had already spoken to my attorney. I did not tell him about the external drive in my office. I smiled and agreed to the dinner, and went to bed that night feeling the particular exhaustion of someone who is 2 moves ahead in a game no one else knows they're playing. The dinner was held 2 weeks later at the lake house Diane owned about 40 minutes outside the city. It was a beautiful property, inherited from her own parents, and she referred to it often as a symbol of what family was supposed to look like. She had a gift for that, for wrapping her control in the language of legacy and love. Daniel and I drove up on a Saturday afternoon. His sister, Renata, was already there when we arrived. Renata was 3 years older than Daniel, and had Diane's precise quality, That same calibrated warmth that never quite reached the eyes. She worked in real estate. She always seemed to know exactly how much everything was worth. Dinner was pleasant enough on the surface. Diane made pot roast, and there was wine, and the fireplace was going, and it looked, from the outside, like exactly what it was supposed to be. Under the surface of it, I could feel something tightening by degrees. After dinner, when the plates were cleared and the wine was poured, and I was sitting with my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that I had watched Diane prepare from across the kitchen, and had decided, after watching her turn away twice for longer than necessary, not to drink, Diane began. She framed it as a family meeting. She said she had been thinking about what was best for all of them. She said that with my inheritance now available, this was a generational opportunity they couldn't afford to let pass. She had worked with a business consultant, she said, and had drawn up a preliminary plan for a property investment company. She slid a folder across the table toward me. I looked at it without touching it. I said I appreciated the thought and that I was not in a position to commit any of my personal funds to an external venture. The warmth went out of Diane's face the way a light goes out when someone cuts the power. Renata sat up straighter. Daniel looked at the table. Diane said, very carefully, that she hoped I understood this was a family decision and not solely mine to make. I said that my personal inheritance was, in fact, solely mine. She said that marriage meant shared finances and shared futures, and that Daniel had as much right to those funds as I did. I said that was an interesting interpretation, and I looked at Daniel and waited. He did not look up. What happened next took less than 40 seconds, and I have replayed it more times than I could count. Diane stood up and said that she had spent 3 years watching me keep Daniel from his family, isolate him from his mother, refuse to participate in their lives in any meaningful way. She said I had always been selfish, and that my refusal to contribute to the family showed exactly who I was. Her voice rose as she went, and I sat completely still and let her speak, because I needed her to say it all out loud, in front of her son. When she finished, I turned to Daniel. He was looking at his hands. I stood up. I said that I was going to give everyone a moment and I would be outside. I walked to the front door. I put on my coat. I stepped onto the covered porch and I pulled out my phone, and I texted my attorney's emergency line. Not because anything illegal had happened in those 40 seconds, but because I knew what kind of night it was going to be, and I wanted a record of when I had reached out. I stood on that porch for 11 minutes. I know because I checked my phone. The lake was dark and still, and the air was cold, and I felt, for the first time in 3 years, something that I could only describe as clear. Daniel came outside. He sat down next to me on the porch steps, and he didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said he was sorry. He said he hadn't known his mother was going to do that. I asked him what he thought tonight was for. He didn't answer. I asked him if he had known about the business plan. He was quiet for just a beat too long, and that beat told me everything. I said I needed him to understand something. I said the money was going nowhere. I said I needed him to stand next to me when I went back inside and make that clear. I said that the version of our marriage where I was expected to absorb his family's financial ambitions was over, and if that was a problem for him, we needed to have a much larger conversation. He said okay. He said he would handle it. We went back inside. Daniel did say something. He said his mother had overstepped. He said the money was Elena's and not up for discussion. Diane looked at him the way a person looks at a child who has mispronounced a word at dinner, with a patience that is also a punishment. Renata looked at me with something flat and evaluating in her eyes. We left shortly after. The drive home was quiet. It felt like something had shifted between us, but I couldn't yet tell whether it had shifted towards something or away from it. What I did not know, sitting in that passenger seat watching the dark highway move past, was that the evening was not over for Diane. My attorney called me the following Monday morning. She had received a call from a colleague over the weekend. Diane had approached a financial advisor, not her own but a third party, with questions about marital asset claims in the state. She had asked specifically whether an inheritance received during a marriage could be considered jointly owned if the couple were to divorce. I sat with that information for the rest of the day. She wasn't trying to convince me. She was building a case for the event of a divorce. She was, I understood then, already preparing to take my inheritance in the dissolution of a marriage she may have been planning to engineer. I called my attorney back that afternoon and I told her everything. The camera footage, the missing documents, the teacup I had not drunk from, the business plan in the folder I had not touched, the timeline of the inheritance disclosure, and the escalation that had followed it. My attorney was quiet for a long moment when I finished. Then she said, very evenly, that I had been thorough and that we should meet in person the next morning. I went home that evening and made dinner and watched television with Daniel and said nothing about any of it. I was not being deceptive. I was being careful. There is a difference. And by that point in my life, I had learned exactly where the line between them was. Daniel and I had a long conversation 3 days later. I showed him the camera footage. Not all of it, but enough. The footage of Diane going through my coat pockets. The footage of her removing documents from the entryway desk. I watched my husband watch it, and I watched something crack open in his expression that I had never seen before. It was not anger. It was grief. It was the specific grief of a person who has spent 35 years believing one version of a story and is watching in real time the footage that doesn't match. He sat with it for a long time. He asked if there was more. I said yes. He asked if he could see it. I said I would share everything I had with him, and also with our respective attorneys, because at that point I believed we needed legal guidance around what came next. He flinched at the word attorneys. He said it sounded like I was preparing for a divorce. I said I was preparing to be taken seriously. I said that was not the same thing, but that it might become the same thing depending on what he decided to do with what he'd just seen. He was quiet for so long that I got up and made coffee just to have something to do with my hands. When I came back, he said he needed time to think. I said I understood. I said I was going to stay at my friend Karen's place for a few nights to give him space, and that he should call me when he was ready. I stayed at Karen's for 4 nights. On the 3rd night, Diane called my personal cell. I let it go to voicemail. The message was composed and deliberate, and said, in essence, that she was concerned about the state of my marriage, and that she hoped I would consider what I was doing to her son and his family. She said she had always tried to welcome me, and that she was sorry if any misunderstandings had occurred. I saved the voicemail. I sent a copy to my attorney. I noted the date and time. On the 4th night, Daniel called. He said he had spent 3 days reviewing everything, including older footage I had shared with him through a secure file transfer. And he said he had called his mother. He said the conversation had been the hardest one of his life. He said she had denied everything, then rationalized, then finally arrived at a version of events in which she had been trying to protect him from a wife who was using him for financial stability. He said he had told her that was not what he saw in the footage. He said she had hung up. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't know how to undo the years of not seeing it. He said he wanted to try if I was willing. I want to be careful here too, because this is the part of the story that is most complicated to tell. I did not rush back. I did not accept the apology as a conclusion. I told Daniel that I was glad he had seen what was in the footage, and I was glad he had spoken to his mother, and I needed him to understand that my trust in our marriage had been eroded, not just by what his mother had done, but by his years of choosing her version of events over mine. I said rebuilding that would take real time and real work, and that I was open to that, but I needed him to be certain he was too. We spent the following 6 months in couples therapy. I stayed in our home. We did the work. Some of it was painful in ways I hadn't anticipated. Daniel had to confront the degree to which his mother's voice had operated inside him as a kind of authority he had never questioned, and confronting that was not a quick process. There were weeks when I was not sure we would make it. There were other weeks when I saw something genuine shifting in him, and I felt the first tentative green shoots of something I could call hope. Meanwhile, my attorney had filed a civil complaint against Diane. The documents she had removed from our entryway desk had included a copy of my father's estate instructions and early draft account information. The complaint alleged theft of private financial documents and requested an investigation into whether the information had been used in any unauthorized financial inquiries. The investigation found that Diane's name appeared in a credit inquiry associated with a financial account connected to my name, an inquiry that had been made without my knowledge or consent. That finding changed the nature of the case considerably. Renata's name did not appear in the formal complaint, but she was interviewed as part of the civil process. She retained her own attorney. The relationship between her and Daniel became, in his words, a formal distance, which I understood to mean they spoke at Christmas and not much else. Diane settled. Her attorneys recommended it and she accepted, which I believe was the first genuinely wise decision she had made in the entire arc of that story. The settlement required financial restitution, covered my legal costs, and included a formal agreement regarding no further contact. I did not celebrate the settlement. I signed the documents and went to dinner with Karen and ordered the expensive pasta, and we talked about her new apartment for most of the meal, and I was genuinely interested in what she was saying, and that interest itself felt like a kind of victory. My marriage survived. I want to say that plainly because I know that is not always the outcome, and I don't want to offer this story as evidence of something it isn't. Daniel and I are still together. We have a daughter now, and she is the most opinionated, most tenacious, most brilliantly exhausting 3-year-old I have ever encountered. She has my father's eyes and her father's laugh, and I am sometimes overwhelmed, in the best possible way, by how fully she exists. Daniel is a different husband than the one I married, and I am a different wife. We are not the people we were at 29 and 31, sitting across a dinner table from his mother while she passed the pot roast and made her plans. We are harder in some ways and softer in others, which I think is what happens to people who go through something real together and come out on the other side still choosing each other. I think about my father sometimes, the way he spent 40 years being careful, the way he didn't trust easily but trusted completely when he decided to. I used to think his caution was a limitation. Now I understand it was a form of love. He was careful so that I could be protected. He put those years of savings away so that I would have something that was mine, completely and without condition. He knew, maybe, that there would be people in my life who would see that asset and reach for it, and he wanted to make sure I had time, the full reach of my 20s, to learn enough about the world to hold on to it. I held on to it. The forensic accounting training I did in the 2 years after the settlement was not revenge. I want to be clear about that, the same way I want to be clear about everything now, with the same precision I bring to every financial document I review. I trained in forensic accounting because the experience of watching someone try to quietly dismantle my financial security made me want to understand money at the level where manipulation happens, so that I could recognize it, and name it, and stop it. I started consulting for women in financial disputes. Then I added a partner, then 2 more staff. The firm grew the way things grow when they're built on something real, slowly and then faster, with a clarity of purpose that money alone could never create. My office has large windows. On clear days you can see 3 different neighborhoods from where I sit, all that ordinary human life moving through its routines. I keep a photograph of my father on my desk, and sometimes when I'm working late, I look at it and I feel the specific comfort of knowing that the thing he worked so hard to protect reached me intact. His investment in my future survived everything that was thrown at it. So did I. I want to say something to anyone who is listening to this and recognizing something in their own life. Not a speech, not a list of instructions, just something honest. If you are in a situation where the person who is supposed to love you is consistently choosing someone else's version of you over the version you know to be true, that is not a small thing, and it is not something you simply accommodate. You are allowed to document. You are allowed to prepare. You are allowed to love someone and simultaneously protect yourself from the conditions their love is placed in. You do not have to be obvious about it. You do not have to announce it. You just have to stay clear about what you know and keep the evidence somewhere safe and trust that the moment will come when clarity is required, and when it does, you will be ready. The most powerful thing I did in that entire 3-year period was not hiring an attorney or filing a complaint or keeping the camera footage, though all of those things mattered. The most powerful thing I did was refuse to drink the tea. It was a small decision in a big room. I watched her back turn twice. I watched the pause that was just a little too long. I did not say anything. I just set the mug down, gently, and kept my hands around the outside of it for warmth and waited. You have to learn to trust the small, quiet voice that says something is not right, even when every other voice in the room is insisting you're imagining it. That voice is not paranoia. That voice is data. And I am a woman who knows how to read data. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to trust your instincts against everything other people were telling you? Have you ever been in a situation where protecting yourself meant being quiet and strategic instead of loud and immediate? Tell me in the comments. Your experience matters here, and I want this to be a space where we can actually talk about these things without being told we're overreacting. If this story stayed with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to Recovery Stories for more. I put these stories out because I believe that hearing how other people navigated the impossible helps all of us figure out our own way through. Your peace is not a luxury. It is the foundation. Protect it like the asset it is.